This barbaric ritual was so extreme that even ancient Rome's darkest entertainment districts banned it. Yet in Constantinople's hippodrome, it happened nightly to children as young as 10. Discover how systematic child abuse created history's most dangerous woman and triggered the massacre of 30,000 people. The practice was called Leda and the Swan. A naked child would lie on stage while trained animals performed acts that would horrify modern audiences. 80,000 spectators cheered as coins rained down on a little girl's body. This wasn't mere entertainment, it was legalized trafficking on an industrial scale. The 10-year-old enduring this nightmare would become the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire. Her name was Theodora. Everything began when her father, the bear-keeper, died. This is how childhood trauma creates monsters who reshape history. When Theodora's father, Acacius, died, it triggered the most systematic child trafficking in ancient history. To understand how one man's death could destroy an entire family, you need to know about the Byzantine political system that controlled everything. In Constantinople, in 504 CE, society was divided by two massive political factions, the Blues and the Greens. These weren't just sports teams, they were political parties controlling jobs, entertainment, and government positions. Every citizen belonged to one faction, and that allegiance determined their entire life. Acacius, Theodora's father, held a crucial position in the Green faction as their official bear-keeper, training massive brown bears for hippodrome combat before 80,000 screaming spectators. When Acacius died suddenly, his family should have automatically inherited protection and employment. That was the rule. That's how the system worked. But here's where everything went catastrophically wrong. Asterius, the Greens' dancing master who controlled entertainment jobs, accepted a bribe. Instead of protecting Acacius's widow and 3 daughters, he gave the bear-keeper position to another man entirely. With one corrupt decision, he condemned 3 little girls to the most sophisticated child trafficking network in the ancient world. Theodora's mother faced an impossible choice: watch her daughters starve or feed them to the brutal system that kept Constantinople's entertainment industry profitable. She chose survival, but the price was unthinkable. To understand how barbaric these practices were, consider that even ancient Romans, who invented gladiator death matches, considered Byzantine circus entertainment too extreme for civilized society. What happened next would be considered organized. Child abuse in every modern legal system. In a scene of calculated humiliation, Theodora's mother dressed her 3 little girls as suppliants with laurel wreaths and paraded them before 80,000 spectators in the hippodrome arena. She was essentially advertising them for intimate services, begging the crowd to take pity on these children who were now available for the entertainment industry's darkest purposes. The Greens, who caused this crisis through corruption, turned their backs completely, cold, brutal, final. But the Blues faction took pity and gave work to the stepfather. This single moment sealed Theodora's fate and programmed her for revenge on a scale nobody could imagine. She would never forget who abandoned her family to human trafficking and who showed mercy. By age 10, Theodora was performing the most degrading acts imaginable. The Leda and the Swan performance became her specialty, lying completely naked. On stage, while trained geese picked barley seeds from her body, as thousands of men cheered and threw coins at a child's naked flesh. Yet this theatrical perversion was just foreplay for what came after the show. The real horror happened in the back rooms of the hippodrome, where children as young as 8 were expected to provide intimate services to senators, merchants, and wealthy citizens. Byzantine law explicitly stated that actresses and performers were equivalent to prostitutes, meaning physical submission wasn't just expected, it was legally mandated. Consider the psychological impact. a child who should have been learning. To read and write was instead discovering how men's carnal desires made them vulnerable, how pain could be profitable, and how her body was her only asset in a world that saw her as disposable. But Theodora wasn't just surviving this systematic abuse, she was analyzing it. While other children broke under the psychological torture, she studied the power dynamics. Each night revealed how powerful senators lost control and dignity over a child's body. She observed wealthy merchants become pathetic and desperate for their preferred entertainment. Every performance became a masterclass in human weakness, intimate psychology, and the dark mechanics of desire. The hippodrome transformed into her university, and the curriculum was manipulation through physical exploitation. The bear keeper's death created perfect conditions for producing the most dangerous woman in history, someone who understood exactly how to weaponize the carnal appetites that men thought made them powerful. Theodora was about to graduate with deadly honors. For 6 years, Theodora endured the most barbaric practices in the ancient world. But while other children were destroyed by this systematic abuse, she mastered how to destroy the men who thought they owned her. By age 16, she had become the hippodrome's most requested performer, not just for her body, but for her intelligence. The same senators and merchants who threw coins at her naked 10-year-old body now paid premium prices for private sessions. They thought they were buying a prostitute. They had no idea they were creating their own executioner. Then came the opportunity that would transform her from victim into predator. Hetzebolus, the Syrian governor of Libya, visited Constantinople seeking entertainment. He was one of Rome's most powerful provincial governors, controlling vast wealth and military forces. When he saw Theodora perform, he didn't just want her for a night. He wanted to own her completely. The offer was unprecedented: become his personal concubine, live in luxury, and escape the hippodrome's trafficking forever. For a girl who spent 6 years being exploited by strangers, this seemed like salvation. In Libya, in 516 CE, Theodora lived in Hetzebolus' palace for nearly 4 years. But she wasn't just enjoying luxury, she was receiving her graduate education in intimate manipulation. This was where she discovered that the barbaric practices she endured as a child could be weaponized against the men who thought they were in control. Hetzebolus believed he owned her body, but Theodora analyzed how his carnal obsessions made him weak. Experience taught her which desires shamed him, which fantasies he would pay anything to fulfill, and which physical practices made him lose his political judgment. Every intimate moment became a lesson in psychological warfare. Yet, the most important revelation was this: powerful men became completely helpless when they were physically dependent. Hetzebolus, who commanded armies and governed provinces, transformed into a pathetic, desperate creature when she controlled his access to pleasure. The same dynamic she witnessed as a child when influential men lost dignity over erotic entertainment. This became her primary weapon. Then she made a crucial mistake. Theodora began using her intimate knowledge to manipulate his political decisions. When Hetzebolus realized that his provincial policies were being influenced by his concubines' physical manipulation, he exploded with rage. "Get out, you worthless woman!" Hetzebolus screamed as he hurled her belongings into the burning Libyan sand. She stood there in the desert heat, sweat beading on her skin, the taste of dust and humiliation bitter in her mouth. After 4 years of luxury, she was thrown back into trafficking with nothing. However, this betrayal became her most valuable education. The journey back to Constantinople transformed her into the deadliest intimate predator in history. Ship by ship, across the Mediterranean, she sold her body to survive. But now she was applying everything she learned from Hetzebolus. The salt spray stung her face as she systematically destroyed every man who thought he was using her. The cramped quarters below deck reeked of unwashed bodies and desperation. But Theodora had learned to thrive in these conditions. Every night, in those suffocating shipholds, she discovered new ways to weaponize physical intimacy. The Roman merchant who paid extra for intelligent conversation. She learned his trade secrets and used them against his competitors. The ship captain who gave her free passage. She uncovered his smuggling operations and filed the information away for future use. Each client became a case study in male weakness. She was building a mental database of how carnal desire made powerful men vulnerable, stupid, and ultimately destroyable. In Alexandria, she made the connection that would change everything. She converted to monophysite Christianity under Patriarch Timothy III. But this wasn't a spiritual awakening, it was strategic positioning. She was building a religious power base, completely independent from the trafficking system that created her. More importantly, in Antioch she met Macedonia, a blues faction performer who had been sending information back to Constantinople. Macedonia revealed that a 40-year-old prince named Justinian had been asking specific questions about the former circus girl who survived Libya. What Theodora didn't realize was that her reputation had preceded her. Stories of a woman who could physically manipulate provincial governors, who survived abandonment and turned it into strength, who understood the dark psychology of powerful men better than they understood themselves. As her ship approached Constantinople's harbor, she saw the golden domes of the city that had cast her out as a child. But she was not the same person who left. The barbaric practices that should have destroyed her had instead created the most dangerous woman in the Roman Empire. She was about to meet the man who would give her the ultimate target for intimate revenge, an entire empire. What happened next proved that the most barbaric practices could be turned into the deadliest political weapons. Theodora was about to use everything she learned from systematic exploitation to seduce, manipulate, and ultimately control the future emperor of Rome. In 521 CE, when 40-year-old Prince Justinian first saw Theodora at an elite court gathering, he thought he was looking at just another beautiful former performer. He had no idea he was staring at a woman who had spent 16 years mastering how to destroy powerful men. The seduction began immediately, but this wasn't ordinary attraction. It was intimate warfare, perfected through years of barbaric practice. Theodora employed every technique learned from her exploitation. She studied Justinian's carnal preferences with the same cold analysis she once applied to hippodrome clients. She discovered his weakness for intelligent conversation during private moments, a preference she had learned to exploit with Roman merchants on those Mediterranean ships. She identified his need for emotional connection, the same vulnerability that made Hexebolus physically dependent. The shocking truth she didn't tell Justinian. During those desperate nights in Alexandria, she learned more than religious conversion. She discovered how to use her body not just for survival, but to completely control men's minds. Justinian was about to become her greatest experiment in intimate manipulation. The psychological dynamic was terrifying. Justinian believed he was choosing to marry this extraordinary woman, but Theodora was systematically programming his physical obsession. Every private moment was calculated to increase his dependence. Every intimate encounter was designed to weaken his political judgment. When Justinian announced his intention to marry her, the court exploded in scandal. "You want to marry a prostitute?" The senators couldn't believe the heir to the Byzantine throne wanted to wed a woman who had performed degrading acts for entertainment. Yet this scandal revealed the true genius of Theodora's strategy. She wasn't just seducing Justinian, she was forcing him to choose between political respectability and carnal obsession, and physical addiction always won. The legal impossibility seemed insurmountable. Constantinople's ancient laws specifically forbade senators from marrying actresses. Once an actress, always an actress. The legal degradation was permanent. designed to keep erotic entertainers separated from political power forever. However, the real obstacle wasn't legal, it was personal. Empress Euphemia stood between Theodora and ultimate power like an immovable barrier. She was once a slave herself, climbing from absolute nothing to the highest position a woman could hold. But Euphemia recognized exactly what Theodora represented: intimate manipulation, weaponized for political conquest. "I climbed up from slavery," Euphemia declared in front of the entire court, her finger pointing accusingly at Theodora, "but I was never a prostitute." The confrontation was electric. Former slave versus former trafficking victim, fighting over who deserved to rule an empire. Euphemia understood the danger perfectly. She wasn't just opposing a marriage, she was trying to prevent a woman trained in barbaric practices from gaining access to imperial power. She blocked every legal reform, used her influence to prevent marriage discussions, and forbade Theodora from attending court functions. Then, on a cold night in 523 CE, Empress Euphemia died mysteriously in her sleep. No warning signs, no illness, no witnesses, just a sudden death that removed the only person capable of stopping Theodora's intimate conquest of the empire. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious. Within hours of Euphemia's death, Emperor Justin began drafting new legislation specifically crafted to allow Theodora's marriage. The law was so targeted, it might as well have had her name written on it. The terrifying reality: Theodora had learned about poisons during her years of trafficking. The experienced prostitutes who survived taught her which herbs could incapacitate dangerous clients, which toxins left no traces, and which methods looked like natural death. The sudden demise of the only obstacle to her marriage wasn't a coincidence. It was the application of knowledge gained through years of abuse. In 525 CE, in Hagia Sophia, the wedding ceremony represented the ultimate triumph of intimate manipulation over political power. Every step Theodora took down that marble aisle was calculated theater. The same woman who once performed naked for coins now wore imperial purple silk, but the performance skills remained identical. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the coronation of systematic exploitation. The child who endured barbaric practices in the hippodrome had used those same techniques to seduce an emperor, eliminate her primary rival, and position herself as co-ruler of the Roman Empire. But Theodora's intimate manipulation had created something far more dangerous than a powerful marriage. She had produced a partnership based on physical obsession, where political decisions would be influenced by carnal control, and where the brutal practices of her past became the governing philosophy of an empire. The former trafficking victim was about to become the ultimate predator on the largest possible stage. 7 years after weaponizing her exploitation into imperial power, the Empress faced the ultimate test. When 30,000 people demanded her death, she would prove that the most barbaric practices created the most ruthless political monsters. In January 532 CE, the Nika revolt wasn't just a political rebellion, it was a direct attack on everything Theodora represented. For the first time in Byzantine history, the blues and greens united under one battle cry: Nika, conquer! But their real target wasn't just the government, it was the former prostitute, who had manipulated her way to imperial power through intimate warfare. The crowds filling Constantinople's streets weren't just angry about taxes or policies. They were revolting against the fundamental corruption of allowing a woman trained in degrading practices to rule their empire. Every chant of Nika carried the unspoken message: the prostitute must die. This was the moment she had been preparing for her entire life. Every humiliation in the hippodrome, every manipulation technique learned from trafficking, every psychological Weapon developed through childhood trauma, it all led to this decision. The violence exploded like wildfire through the narrow streets. The acrid smoke of burning buildings stung everyone's eyes as angry mobs surged forward with torches blazing. The original Hagia Sophia erupted in flames, its ancient timbers crackling and collapsing in showers of sparks. The Senate House burned to the ground, centuries of Roman law turning to ash. But for the Empress, watching the city burn wasn't terrifying. It was familiar. The chaos reminded her of the hippodrome crowds, screaming for erotic entertainment. The same energy that once demanded her naked body was now demanding her death. She understood mob psychology because she had learned to manipulate it as a child. The metallic smell of blood mixed with burning wood as armed rebels killed government officials in the streets. Military units defected, throwing down their weapons and joining the revolution. The emperor's own bodyguards questioned whether they should stay loyal or save themselves. Then the rebels made their ultimate move. They declared Hypatius, nephew of former Emperor Anastasius, as the new emperor. The message thundered through every district. The reign of the corrupt imperial couple was over. Military commanders openly discussed evacuation plans. Treasury chests filled with gold and silver were loaded onto ships in the harbor, wooden planks groaning under the weight. Justinian's closest advisors begged him to flee while escape was still possible, their voices cracking with desperation. On January 18th, 532 CE, in the emergency council meeting, the air was thick with fear and the distant sounds of rioting. Every advisor told Justinian the same thing: run, save your life, abandon Constantinople. Yet they didn't understand what they were asking. They wanted Justinian to abandon the woman who had controlled him for 7 years through intimate manipulation, whose physical influence had become the foundation of his political identity. They were asking him to reject everything she represented. Then, the Empress rose from her chair, her silk robes rustling in the terrified silence. This was the moment when years of exploitation transformed into ultimate political power. The 10-year-old girl, who had learned to perform for violent crowds, was about to give the performance of her life. My opinion is that the present time, above all others, is not the right moment for flight, even though it brings safety. Her voice cut through the panic like a blade, each word carrying the authority of someone who had survived the worst men could do to a woman. May I never be separated from this purple, and may I not live to see the day when those who meet me shall not address me as mistress. She looked directly at Justinian, her dark eyes burning with the accumulated rage of 16 years of childhood. Abuse. The candles flickered, casting shadows across her face as she delivered the words that would seal 30,000 fates. As for myself, I approve a certain ancient saying, royalty is a good burial shroud. This wasn't just political defiance, it was revenge on the ultimate scale. The crowd that wanted to kill her represented every man who had ever paid to abuse her body, every senator who threw coins at her naked childhood performances, every client who thought he owned her because he purchased her services. Justinian, still physically obsessed after 7 years of manipulation, chose massacre over abandoning his empress. The plan was brutally simple and revealed her understanding of crowd psychology learned in the hippodrome. General Belisarius and General Mundus would surround the arena during the rebels' victory celebration, when all enemies were trapped in one location, the same venue where she had once performed degrading acts. 100,000 people packed into the hippodrome, believing they were witnessing the birth of a new empire. Instead, they were walking into the ultimate revenge fantasy of a former trafficking victim. The killing began when the celebration reached its peak. Imperial soldiers blocked every exit with grinding metal gates, then moved through the crowd with methodical precision. The screams echoed off stone walls as families were butchered where they stood, blood pooling in the sand that had once absorbed the tears of exploited children. The irony was perfect and terrifying. The arena that had taught her how to perform for violent crowds became the stage for her ultimate performance, the systematic execution of everyone who dared challenge her conquest of power through intimate manipulation. By day's end, silence replaced screaming. More than 30,000 corpses littered the arena floor. Not one rebel survived. The hippodrome, where barbaric practices had once entertained the masses, became a graveyard filled by a woman those practices had created. Justinian's 535 CE reform required all governors to swear loyalty not just to the emperor, but to his empress as well. The former trafficking victim had achieved the ultimate revenge, legal recognition as co-ruler of the empire that had once exploited her body. 30,000 people died because barbaric practices created a woman who understood that survival required the complete destruction of anyone who threatened her power. And this was just the beginning of her reign of vengeance. With 30,000 corpses proving her power, the Empress now applied the intimate knowledge gained from barbaric practices to systematically eliminate every remaining threat. What happened next revealed how childhood exploitation became the perfect training for political assassination. From her private imperial chambers, she operated what historians call a parallel government. But it was really something more sinister, an intelligence network that would make modern spy agencies envious. While Justinian held court in the grand throne room, she conducted her real business in intimate quarters, where the walls witnessed, whispered confessions, and private secrets. Her network functioned through manipulation perfected in the hippodrome. Eunuchs and trusted women moved through palace corridors, gathering the most dangerous intelligence possible. Who slept with whom? Which senators had shameful preferences? What private secrets could destroy political careers? She instituted a protocol that shocked the imperial court. Everyone must prostrate themselves and kiss both her feet and Justinian's. This wasn't just about reverence, it was domination through public humiliation, the same dynamic she had experienced. As a child performer, now reversed with deadly precision, now began her masterpiece of political assassination. Target 1, Pope Silverius in 537 CE. When the Pope refused to restore her religious ally, the Empress didn't argue theology. She applied manipulation techniques learned from years of trafficking. Working through Belisarius and his wife Antonina, she fabricated treason charges that played on the paranoia of powerful men. The Pope, accused of plotting with Goths, died in exile, eliminated by a woman who had learned that men's fears made them vulnerable to any accusation. Yet this was just practice for her real target. Target 2, Queen Amalasuntha of the Ostrogoths, in 535 CE. Here, jealousy became genocide. Amalasuntha represented everything the Empress feared: natural nobility, inherited power, and worst of all, she had been exchanging correspondence with Justinian about political alliances. Theodora recognized the signs because she had perfected them herself. The late-night reading of letters, the lingering over diplomatic language that could be interpreted as romantic, the political discussions that sounded suspiciously like intellectual seduction. She was watching Justinian fall under another woman's influence, using the same techniques she had employed to capture him. The solution revealed the predator's mindset: if you can't control them through intimacy, destroy them completely. Using Ambassador Peter the Illyrian, she encouraged King Theodahad to eliminate his own cousin. The method was deliberately intimate. Amalasuntha was murdered while bathing. Vulnerability and physicality combined in the ultimate act of revenge. However, her masterpiece assassination demonstrated how barbaric practices created perfect killers. Target 3, John the Cappadocian in 541 CE. As Praetorian prefect, he was the only man who could compete with her for influence over Justinian. More dangerously, he was immune to manipulation because he understood how it worked. So, she applied the psychological warfare learned as an exploited child. For 6 months, she waged a campaign designed to break his mind the same way her mind had been broken in the Hippodrome. Every day, John received disturbing gifts that mirrored the trauma techniques used on child performers. Wilted flowers representing death, small daggers symbolizing penetration, paintings of execution methods echoing the violence that victims always feared. John began experiencing the same psychological symptoms she had endured as a child: sleeplessness, paranoia, jumping at shadows, sweating through normal interactions. She was reproducing her own childhood trauma in her enemy's mind. Then came the trap that revealed her true genius. The Empress and Antonina formed the deadliest alliance possible. 2 women who understood how manipulation destroyed men. They used John's own daughter as unwitting bait, arranging a fake conspiracy meeting where surveillance agents recorded every treasonous word. The fall was instantaneous and complete. From imperial power to begging in Egyptian streets. This was how a woman trained in barbaric practices destroyed careers, by understanding that every man's mind could be broken the same way hers had been, just with different techniques. These assassinations revealed her greatest achievement, transforming victimhood into predation. She wasn't just eliminating enemies, she was using the knowledge gained from exploitation to redesign an empire where manipulation became the primary governing tool. The former trafficking victim had become the ultimate predator, and she was just getting started. The barbaric practices that created history's deadliest woman were still shaping the world. Her final victory was transforming childhood exploitation into laws that would govern human behavior for centuries. The Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of Western legal tradition, bore the fingerprints of a woman who had learned law through systematic abuse. Her legal revolution served one ultimate purpose: ensuring that no other woman would endure the degrading practices that created her, while simultaneously using those same techniques to maintain absolute power. Her anti-prostitution legislation read like the revenge fantasy of a former trafficking victim. She prohibited forced prostitution, made it illegal for brothel keepers to prevent women from leaving, and ordered the closure of establishments that practiced the same exploitation she had survived. Yet, she also established the Metanoia convent, forcing former prostitutes into religious life, controlling other women's physicality the same way hers had once been controlled. Her marriage and criminal justice reforms revealed the mind of someone who understood intimate violence deeply. She made rape punishable by death regardless of social rank, transferred rapists' property to victims, and expanded women's divorce rights. These weren't just progressive policies. They were the legal codification of revenge by someone who knew exactly how men used physical power to destroy women. Most telling of all, her succession control operated through manipulation of family structures. She orchestrated marriages throughout the court, punished those who refused her politics, and ensured that her conquest of Justinian translated into dynastic control for generations. On June 28, 548 CE, when the Empress died at 48, probably of cancer, the political impact revealed the true extent of her manipulation. Justinian fell into complete psychological collapse, never remarried, and ruled ineffectively for 17 more years. The man she had controlled for decades could not function without the woman who had weaponized intimacy for political power. The most damning evidence: little significant legislation emerged after her death. The legal genius of their partnership died with the woman who had understood how to translate manipulation into governmental control. Archaeological evidence from the San Vitale mosaics shows her depicted larger than other figures, wearing a cloak, embroidered with the three kings bringing gifts to Christ. She was positioning herself as equal to biblical royalty, the ultimate transformation from trafficking victim to divine authority. Today, tourists take selfies in the Hippodrome, where 10-year-old Theodora once performed degrading acts for coins, the same arena where she later ordered 30,000 deaths. From that exploited child to the most powerful woman in history, she proved that the most brutal practices could create the most dangerous political monsters. But was transforming victimhood into predation worth 30,000 lives? The girl who learned manipulation through childhood exploitation ended up manipulating an entire empire. Her story proves that barbaric practices don't just destroy victims, they can create destroyers. Subscribe to discover more stories of how childhood trauma shapes history.